The old man's hands, scarred like desert stone, rested on the arms of a chair that had weathered 40 summers on this porch. Elias Mercer, 90 years behind him and maybe none ahead, watched his grandson Benjamin pace the railing like a caged animal. The boy was 17, restless in that way young men get when they think the world beyond the horizon holds more promise than the ground their grandfathers bled into. "I don't understand why you stay here, Grandpa." Benjamin's voice carried that particular edge of youth, convinced it knows better. "It's 2023. People build empires with code now, not calluses." Elias let the silence stretch. The Arizona sun was painting the mountains copper and gold, the same colors he'd seen that day 40 years ago when everything changed. His eyes, still sharp despite the years, drifted across the land toward three graves under an oak tree that shouldn't exist in this climate but did anyway, roots too stubborn to quit. "Sit down, boy. There's something you need to hear before you pack that bag for good." Something in the old man's tone made Benjamin lower himself onto the steps. The weight of untold history hung in the air like heat shimmer. "Back in 1983, I thought just like you. Thought this land was nothing but dust and broken promises. Then a woman taught me different. Taught me that sometimes what we're defending isn't dirt. It's the choice to stand when falling would be easier. Grandma Claire, before she became my wife, before she became your grandmother, she said 7 words that changed everything. Save me, 3 times a day." Sounds simple, doesn't it? But those 7 words held a promise that would test everything I thought I knew about being a man. Elias's gaze traveled inward, backward, through 4 decades to a younger version of himself. "You want to know why this land matters? Then listen. And maybe when I'm done, you'll understand what's worth bleeding for." July 1983. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of scrub and sand baking under a sun that showed no mercy. The temperature had climbed past 112 degrees, the kind of heat that made men question their sanity for living here at all. Thermal waves turned distant mountains into wavering mirages, shifting and unreal. Elias Mercer, 48 years old and weathered by a decade of solitude, guided his mare Duchess along the trail from Tombstone back to his ranch. 18 miles of nothing but heat and rock and the occasional cry of a circling hawk. He'd sold 3 horses that morning for good money, $200 in silver coins heavy and reassuring in his saddlebags. Enough to see him through winter if he was careful. He'd been a cavalryman once, fought in conflicts he tried not to remember, then spent 11 years chasing raiders through these same mountains. He knew this country the way some men knew the lines on their own palms. Every canyon, every water source, every place where a man could make a stand or meet his end. His wife Anna had died 8 years back. Influenza took her in 3 days, left him with an empty house and a silence so profound it felt like drowning. No children, just him and the land and the horses he broke for a living. He'd learned to live with loneliness the way men learn to live with old wounds. You don't heal exactly, you just get used to the ache. Half a mile ahead, something caught his eye, a vertical shape where nothing vertical should be. At first glance, it looked like a scarecrow or some kind of warning post, but scarecrows don't exist in the middle of nowhere. As Duchess plodded closer, he heard something that froze his blood. A scream. Weak and desperate, barely human. He kicked the mare into a gallop. Dust exploded behind them as Duchess surged forward, her powerful legs eating up the distance. The shape resolved itself into horrible clarity. A woman bound to a wooden cross, crucified under the killing sun. Elias hauled back on the reins 20 feet away, dismounting before Duchess had fully stopped. His boots hit sand and he was running. Cavalry training overriding shock. Assess, act, save. She hung from ropes cutting deep into her wrists. Her skin had blistered and cracked like old leather. Her dress, once blue cotton, was stained dark with sweat and dust. Her lips were split and bleeding, her eyes half closed against the glare. But she was breathing. Barely. Elias pulled his bowie knife and cut the ropes, catching her as she fell. She weighed almost nothing, hollowed out by what must have been 2 days without water. Her skin burned with fever, radiating heat like a stove. "Please?" The words scraped out of her ruined throat. water. He carried her to Duchess, laid her in the shade of the horse's body, and pulled his canteen. 10 years in the cavalry had taught him the protocol for severe dehydration. Too much water too fast could kill her as surely as none at all. He tilted the canteen and let 2 ounces trickle into her mouth. She choked, coughed, but managed to swallow. Her eyes opened wider, focusing on his face with desperate intensity. Who did this? Her fingers clutched at his shirt with surprising strength. Gideon Blackwell. He wanted to marry me. I said no, so he left me here to change my mind. Elias's jaw tightened. He knew the name. Everyone in Cochise County knew Gideon Blackwell, owned half of Wilcox, controlled the other half with money and bullets. The kind of man who thought the world owed him everything and people were just another form of property to acquire. I'm getting you to safety, but she grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to look directly into her bloodshot eyes. The fever made them bright as broken glass. Save me. Her voice was stronger now, urgent with desperation. Save me and I'll give you anything. 3 times a day, every day, I promise. Save me from Blackwell and I'm yours. Morning, noon, and night. Elias froze. The meaning of her words hit him like a fist. This wasn't gratitude. This was a transaction, a bargain struck in the currency of flesh because she had nothing else left to trade. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Her cracked fingers dug into his arm with fierce determination. I don't have money. I don't have land. All I have is me. And I'm choosing where I belong, choosing who touches me, not Blackwell. You. That's my choice. For a long moment, Elias couldn't speak. He was 48 years old, had been alone for a decade breaking horses and avoiding people. He was no saint. But he wasn't the kind of man who took advantage of a dying woman either. But the way she looked at him, not with shame but with defiance, like this deal was her weapon, her way of taking control when everything else had been ripped away, made him pause. Let's get you home first. Then we'll talk. He lifted her onto Duchess and climbed up behind her, one arm circling her waist to keep her steady. Her body burned like a furnace against his chest. He figured she had maybe 12 hours before her system gave up, maybe less. As his ranch came into view 5 miles distant, Elias felt the full weight of what he'd just agreed to, or rather, what he hadn't refused. The line between the two seemed razor thin. One question burned in his mind louder than the desert sun. Would saving her life cost him his soul? The ranch house sat alone in a shallow valley surrounded by scrub oak and mesquite. Nothing fancy, 3 rooms built from pine logs, a roof of clay tiles, and a porch that faced east to catch the morning sun. Behind it stood the horse barn, a storage shed for hay, and a small bunkhouse where Rafael Ortega lived. Rafael was Elias's only employee, a ranch hand who'd worked for him 5 years. Good with horses, better with a rifle, and loyal to a fault. When Elias rode in carrying an unconscious woman, Rafael was there in seconds. Dios mío, Rafael breathed, seeing her condition. What happened? Found her tied up in the desert. 2 days without water. Elias dismounted carefully, keeping the woman cradled against his chest. Get me clean cloth, cool water, and that salt mixture we used during the Apache campaigns. Rafael nodded and ran. Elias carried her inside and laid her on his own bed, the only decent mattress in the house. Her breathing came shallow and rapid, her skin flushed dangerously red despite the relative cool of the interior. He'd seen men die from heat stroke during the war, knew the signs, knew she was right on the edge. Rafael returned with supplies. Together they worked with the efficiency of old soldiers. Cool cloths on her forehead, neck, and wrists. Salt and sugar solution fed to her spoonful by spoonful every 15 minutes. They cut away her ruined dress and covered her with a sheet dampened with well water. All through that first night, Elias sat beside the bed. He'd done this before, 10 years ago, watching Anna slip away despite everything he tried. The memory sat on his shoulders like a weight made of lead and regret. I won't let another one die, he whispered to the darkness. Not in my hands. Not again. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness. Once she opened her eyes and looked directly at him. Thank you. Save your strength. But she wasn't done. 3 times a day. I meant it. That's my promise. Then she was gone again, pulled under by fever and exhaustion. Raphael stood in the doorway, concern etched deep in his weathered face. Patron, what did she say? Elias shook his head. She's delirious. Doesn't know what she's saying. But he knew it was a lie even as he spoke it. Her eyes had been too clear, too focused. She knew exactly what she'd offered. The question was whether he was man enough to refuse. Dawn came slowly, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and orange. Elias had dozed in the chair beside the bed, jerking awake every time her breathing changed. Raphael had taken over the watch at 3 in the morning, but Elias couldn't leave. Something kept him rooted there, some instinct that said she needed him close. As light filtered through the window, he made a decision. Raphael, I'm riding into Wilcox. Keep watch over her. Don't let anyone near this ranch. Raphael's eyes narrowed. You think Blackwell will come? I don't know, but I'm not taking chances. Elias saddled Duchess in the pre-dawn darkness and rode hard for Wilcox, pushing the mare faster than he should. But time mattered now. Every hour that passed was an hour Blackwell might use to cover his tracks or make his next move. The town was just waking up when Elias thundered in. He tied Duchess outside the Western Union office and waited for it to open at 6 sharp. The operator, a thin man named Harrison, looked surprised to see anyone so early. Need to send a telegram. Urgent. To U.S. Marshal Thomas Wade in Tucson. Harrison pulled out a form. Go ahead. Elias dictated slowly, making sure every word counted. To Marshal T. Wade, Tucson, from E. Mercer, Cochise County. Date 15th July 1983. Urgent. Rescued young woman abandoned in desert 2 days. Suspect Gideon Blackwell of Wilcox. Crime attempted murder. Require immediate investigation. Living witness available. Elias Mercer, former Lieutenant Company D, 4th Cavalry. Harrison's eyes widened as he copied it down. Mr. Mercer, this is serious business. You sure about this? Dead sure? How much? $250. Elias counted out the coins from his saddlebag, money he'd just earned selling horses, now spent on justice. Or revenge. The line between them seemed unclear. Next, he went to the general store and bought paper, envelope, and stamps. He sat down at a barrel outside and wrote for 30 minutes straight. 6 pages detailing everything, where he'd found her condition, her accusation against Blackwell, a request for Marshal Wade to investigate Blackwell for prior crimes, including a woman named Martha Collins, who died in the desert 2 years ago under suspiciously similar circumstances. He sealed the letter, marked it express mail, and paid an extra $25 to ensure it went out on the next stage. By the time he rode back to his ranch, the sun stood high and merciless. He'd been gone for hours. Part of him expected to find Blackwell's men waiting, but the ranch sat quiet under the heat, exactly as he'd left it. Raphael met him at the door. She woke up, Patron. Asked for you. Elias's heart kicked harder than it should. He stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. The woman sat propped up on pillows, still pale but noticeably stronger. A cup of broth sat on the bedside table, half empty. Her eyes tracked him as he entered, and this time they were clear, fever-broken. You're the man who found me. Her voice was rough as sandpaper but steady. What's your name? Elias Mercer. This is my ranch. I'm Claire Donovan. She paused, gathering courage. I told you my father owes Gideon Blackwell money. That's why he wanted to marry me. But there's more you should know. Elias pulled the chair closer. I'm listening. What came next was a story that made his blood run cold. Not just a tale of debt and coercion, but a carefully constructed trap that had been years in the making. Claire's father, William, had been a small rancher, struggling but honest. 2 years ago, his cattle had fallen sick with some mysterious disease, nearly wiping out his herd. He'd borrowed $2,500 from Blackwell at what seemed like reasonable terms, 10% interest. But the loan documents William had signed without reading carefully actually specified 40% annual interest, compounded monthly. By the time William realized the truth, he owed over $5,000, and Blackwell had made his offer. Marry off Claire to clear the debt, with $5,000 extra to rebuild the ranch. My father was terrified. Tears streamed down Claire's face now. Blackwell's men came to our house at midnight, dragged him to Blackwell's mansion, told him he had 1 week to deliver me or lose everything. And you? I said no. I'm 25 years old, Mr. Mercer, old enough to choose my own path. So Blackwell decided to break me the old-fashioned way. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. He invited the whole town to a party, 200 people. In front of all of them, he got down on one knee and proposed. Offered me a diamond ring worth $3,000. Elias could picture it. The public spectacle designed to force her hand through shame and social pressure. What did you do? Claire's eyes hardened. I said no. Told him I didn't love him and would never marry a man who tried to buy people like they were cattle. Then I walked out. That must have cost him more than money. Gideon Blackwell had never been refused anything in his life. For a woman to reject him publicly, in front of the entire town, she shook her head. 2 days later, 3 of his men grabbed me on my way home from the schoolhouse, took me out to the desert. Blackwell was waiting there with a wooden cross already built. Her voice went flat, reciting facts without emotion, the only way to get through it. He gave me one last chance. Agree to marry him or die in the desert. I chose death. So he tied me up and left. Said he'd come back in 3 days to see if I'd changed my mind, if I was still alive. Elias felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He'd seen cruelty during the war, seen men do terrible things to other men, but this calculated torture, the psychological breaking of another human being, struck him as worse somehow, more personal, more evil. That's when I made my decision. Claire continued, looking directly at him now. If I survived, if someone found me, I would never let anyone own me again. Not Blackwell, not my father, not anyone. But I also knew I couldn't fight him alone. He has 12 armed men. He owns the sheriff. The law won't touch him. She leaned forward, intense despite her weakness. So when you found me, when you saved my life, I made you an offer. 3 times a day. It sounds crude, doesn't it? Sounds like something a desperate woman says when she's half dead. But I meant every word, Mr. Mercer. And I'm saying it again now, completely clear-headed. Save me from Blackwell, protect me, and I'm yours. That's the deal. Elias stood and walked to the window. The honest thing, the right thing, would be to refuse. Tell her she didn't owe him anything. Tell her to rest and heal. And then he'd help her anyway because it was the decent thing to do. But he'd already sent the telegram, already written the letter, already committed himself to standing between her and Blackwell. And if he was honest with himself, some part of him had been dead for 10 years. Some part of him wanted this, not the physical arrangement. That was just the terms of the deal. What he wanted was simpler and more complicated at the same time. He wanted to matter to someone again. I went to Wilcox this morning, he said without turning around. Sent a telegram to U.S. Marshal Thomas Wade in Tucson. He was my commanding officer during the Apache campaigns. Good man, honest. I told him everything you told me, asked him to investigate Blackwell. The silence behind him stretched so long he finally turned around. Claire was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. You did that already? She whispered. Before we even talked? It was the right thing to do. So you don't need me to keep my promise? You'd already decided to help me. Her voice cracked. Then why did you let me offer? Elias crossed back to the chair and sat down. For a long moment, he just looked at her. This fierce, broken, brave young woman who'd chosen death over submission. Because you needed to offer, he said finally. You needed to feel like you had control over something. After what Blackwell did, after what your father almost did, you needed to choose. And I respect that choice. But Claire, you should know something. I'm not doing this for your promise. I'm doing it because it's right. And if you want to keep that promise anyway, I won't say no. But you don't owe me. You never will. For the first time since he'd found her, Claire smiled. It was small and fragile, but genuine. 3 days. She said, Give me 3 days to get my strength back. Then we'll see if you still think I don't owe you anything. Over the next 72 hours, Claire transformed from half-dead to merely exhausted. Elias had seen men bounce back from the edge before, had witnessed what the human body could endure and survive. But watching her recover felt different somehow, more personal, weighted with implications he wasn't ready to examine. Raphael brought food at regular intervals, broth made from beef bones on the first day, soft bread and eggs on the second. By the third day, Claire was eating regular meals and walking around the cabin without assistance, though her skin still bore the marks of her ordeal. Blistered patches on her wrists where the ropes had cut, sunburn across her nose and cheeks that would take weeks to fade. She talked while she healed, filling the silence with stories of her life. Her mother had died when Claire was 12. Pneumonia took her one winter, leaving Claire to run the household while her father worked the ranch. She'd taught herself to read from her mother's books, then got a position teaching at the Wilcox School for Girls when she turned 20. $35 a month, which she gave to her father to help keep the ranch afloat. I thought if I worked hard enough, saved enough, we'd be okay. She said one afternoon while Elias was repairing a fence post within earshot of the open window. I didn't know about the debt until 6 months ago. Didn't know what Blackwell had done to our cattle until later. What did he do? Claire's face hardened, visible through the window frame. Poisoned them. Raphael told me when I asked about it yesterday. Said Blackwell has done it before. Pours arsenic into water sources, kills the livestock, ruins the rancher, then buys the land for pennies on the dollar. Elias made a mental note of that. Another crime to add to the list. Another reason Marshal Wade needed to act fast. On the evening of the third day, as the sun set in a blaze of red and gold, Claire came out to the porch where Elias sat smoking his pipe. She wore one of his old shirts, far too large for her, hanging past her knees like a dress. Her feet were bare, and she'd washed her hair somehow. It fell loose around her shoulders, catching the last light. She sat down beside him, close enough that he could smell the soap she'd used, close enough to feel the warmth of her body in the cooling evening air. 3 days, she said quietly. Like I promised. Elias set down his pipe, his chest tightening. Claire, you're not obligated. I know. She interrupted, and her voice carried that same fierce determination he'd heard when she was half dead in the desert. That's exactly why I want to do this. You didn't ask. You just saved me. And now I need to feel safe. I need to feel like I have control over something. Anything. She paused, searching for words. And I need to replace bad memories with good ones. Elias looked at her sharply. What do you mean? Her hands clenched in her lap. Blackwell didn't just threaten me, Mr. Mercer. At that party when I rejected him, he grabbed me, kissed me in front of everyone. I pushed him away, but later he followed me outside, put his hands on me, whispered things. Her voice cracked. I can still feel it. Still hear his voice. And I want to erase that. Replace it with the touch of someone I trust, someone I chose. Do you understand? And God help him, he did. This wasn't about gratitude or payment. This was about reclaiming her own body, her own choices, her own autonomy after Blackwell had tried to steal all three. If that's what you need, Elias said carefully, then I'll help you. But on one condition. What? You tell me to stop if you change your mind. Anytime, for any reason. This is your choice, which means you get to keep choosing every single time. Understood? Claire nodded, and for the first time since he'd found her, something like peace settled over her features. That night, she came to his room just after dawn. The sky was barely light, the world still quiet. Elias was awake, lying in bed staring at the ceiling when he heard the door open. She stood in the doorway wearing that oversized shirt, her hair loose around her shoulders, bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. Good morning, she said softly. Morning, Elias replied, sitting up. His heart hammered in his chest like he was 18 instead of 48. This is the first time, Claire said, closing the door behind her. Of 3 times today, if you're willing. Elias studied her face, looking for any sign of doubt or fear. Found none, just determination and something that might have been hope. Are you sure? I'm sure. We can wait. You're still healing. I'm sure, she repeated and crossed to the bed. What happened next was tender and careful and nothing like Elias had imagined during the long nights of solitude. She cried afterward, but when he asked if he'd hurt her, she shook her head. No, she whispered. These are good tears. Relief, I think. For the first time in months, I feel like my body belongs to me again. They lay together as the sun rose, and Elias felt something crack open in his chest, some frozen place that had been locked up tight for 10 years, sealed away after Anna died. Thank you, Claire murmured against his shoulder. For what? For giving me back to myself. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal, almost peaceful. Claire kept her promise. 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, she came to him. But between those times, life on the ranch continued. Elias taught her to care for horses, showed her how to brush them properly, how to check their hooves for stones, how to measure out oats and hay. Claire learned quickly, asking questions and remembering answers. On the 5th day, Elias decided it was time for another lesson. He set up 6 empty bean cans on the fence rail behind the house, then led Claire out there carrying his Colt, 45. If Blackwell comes, you need to be able to defend yourself. The revolver looked enormous in her small hands. Elias stood behind her, positioned her stance, showed her how to sight down the barrel. His arms circled hers, helping support the weight. Don't jerk the trigger, he instructed. Squeeze it nice and steady. The first shot kicked the gun up and nearly knocked Claire backward. Elias steadied her, his hands on her shoulders. Again. Get used to the recoil. Let it happen instead of fighting it. They practiced for 2 hours. By the end, Claire had knocked down 3 of the 6 cans. Not perfect, but good enough to make Elias think she might actually survive if things went bad. You're a natural, he told her. Claire smiled despite the ringing in her ears. I had a good teacher. That evening, after supper, as they sat on the porch watching stars emerge, Claire asked him about his wife. What was she like? Anna? Elias smoked in silence for a long while before answering. Kind. Patient. Too good for me, probably. We met in 72, married in 73. She died of influenza in 75, 28 years old. Never got to have children. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Does it bother you? Claire asked carefully. That I'm here in the bed you shared with her? Elias looked at her. Really looked. Anna made me promise right before she died. Made me swear I wouldn't spend the rest of my life alone. Said she wanted me to be happy, even if she couldn't be there to see it. He paused. So no, it doesn't bother me. I think she'd be glad. Claire reached over and took his hand. They sat like that until the moon rose. 2 people learning to be less alone. On the 7th day, something shifted between them. Claire came to find him at noon while he was replacing a broken fence post. The work had him stripped to the waist, sweating in the heat. She closed the barn door behind her and just looked at him for a long moment. This is the 2nd time today, she said. Elias set down the post hole digger. I know what time it is. I don't want you to think I'm only doing this because I promised. What do you mean? Claire crossed to him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. I mean, somewhere between day 3 and day 7, this stopped being about keeping a promise. I come to you because I want to, because when I'm with you, I feel safe and wanted and like I matter. Do you understand? Elias's throat went tight. Claire, I'm 23 years older than you. I don't care about that. You should. You deserve someone young, someone who can give you a full life. I don't want someone young, Claire said fiercely. I want you. The man who saved me. The man who treats me like a person, not property. The man who makes me feel like I have value beyond what's between my legs. Before Elias could respond, she kissed him. Not tentative or uncertain, but direct and sure. When she pulled back, he could barely breathe. I think I'm falling in love with you, he admitted. Good, Claire whispered. Because I already fell. That night, when she came to him for the 3rd time, everything felt different. Not an obligation or even a choice. Just 2 people finding comfort and joy in each other. Afterward, lying tangled in the sheets with Claire's head on his chest, Elias allowed himself to imagine a future, marriage, children, growing old together on this ranch. He was so caught up in the fantasy that he almost missed the sound. Hoofbeats, approaching fast. Raphael burst through the door without knocking, his face tight with alarm. Patron, riders coming. Two of them, watching the ranch from the East Ridge. Elias was on his feet in seconds, pulling on pants and grabbing his Winchester. Claire wrapped herself in a sheet, eyes wide with sudden fear. Is it Blackwell? Don't know yet, Elias said. But I'm not taking chances. Raphael, bar the doors and windows. Claire, get dressed and get the Colt. If anyone tries to come in, you shoot them, understood? She nodded, already moving. Elias stepped out onto the porch as the sun set behind him, casting long shadows across the yard. Two riders sat their horses on the ridge about 400 yards out, too far to identify clearly, but close enough to send a message. They sat there for 10 minutes, just watching. Then one of them lifted something white and waved it, a handkerchief or a flag, a mockery of truce. Then they turned and rode away. Elias stood on the porch long after they'd vanished, Winchester in hand, jaw clenched tight. Blackwell knew where she was now. The waiting was over. Tomorrow or the day after or next week, he would come. And when he did, blood would spill on this land. The only question was whose. On the 9th day, Raphael rode to Wilcox to check for mail and supplies. He returned 3 hours later with a letter bearing the official seal of the U.S. Marshal's office. Elias tore it open with shaking hands. Claire stood beside him, reading over his shoulder. The letter was from Thomas Wade, written in the precise script of a man trained in military correspondence. Elias, received your telegram and detailed letter. I have investigated Gideon Blackwell for the past 9 days. The situation is worse than you indicated. Blackwell has killed 3 people, not 1. Robert Hayes in 80, Martha Collins in 81, and James O'Brien in 82. I have located 2 additional survivors who were abandoned in the desert by Blackwell's men. Both are willing to testify. I am also investigating the cattle poisoning you mentioned. Blackwell has purchased 11 ranches in the past 4 years, all after mysterious livestock die-offs. I will arrive in Wilcox on the 16th of July. I need Miss Donovan's direct testimony for the formal charges. Warning: Blackwell has 12 armed men. He has also bribed the Wilcox sheriff. You cannot rely on local law enforcement. Stay at your ranch. Do not travel alone. Keep weapons close at all times. I will bring 3 deputies with me. We will arrest Blackwell with full force of federal law, but I need 4 more days. Can you hold out that long? Your friend, Thomas Wade, U.S. Marshal, Arizona Territory. Claire's hands trembled as she finished reading. He sent that telegram the first day. You knew help was coming all along. Elias folded the letter carefully. I knew I'd ask for help. Didn't know if it would come in time. 4 more days, Raphael muttered. We need to survive 4 more days. That night, none of them slept well. They took turns on watch, 2 hours each, scanning the darkness for movement. Elias had a bad feeling, the kind that came from years of combat experience, the kind that said the enemy was close and getting closer. At 3 in the morning on the 10th day, Elias's instincts proved correct. He woke to the smell of smoke. The hay barn was on fire. By the time Elias and Raphael got outside with buckets, flames were climbing 20 feet high, wind blowing east toward the horse barn where Duchess and 5 other horses slept. Water chain, Elias shouted. Now! Claire appeared with buckets. The 3 of them formed a line from the well to the fire, passing buckets hand to hand, dumping water on flames that seemed to laugh at their efforts. 45 minutes later, exhausted and filthy with soot, they'd managed to save the horse barn. But the hay barn was a total loss. 2 tons of feed, enough to last through winter, gone. As the sun rose, Elias walked the perimeter and found what he was looking for. A broken kerosene bottle at the base of the burned structure, boot prints in the soft dirt, 2 horses' tracks heading east. Blackwell, Raphael said, studying the tracks. He's declaring war. Elias straightened up, Winchester in hand. Then war is what he'll get. That morning, after Claire had gone back inside to wash the soot from her skin, Raphael pulled Elias aside. The older man's face was troubled, carrying the weight of something unsaid. Patron, there is something you should know about me, Raphael said quietly. Something I have never told you. Elias waited, sensing the importance of whatever was coming. I worked for Blackwell once. 3 years, from 78 to 81. I was one of his men. The words hung in the air like a confession at church. Elias's grip tightened on his rifle, but he didn't point it. Not yet. Tell me. And Raphael did. Told him about the cattle poisoning, the midnight raids, the intimidation. Told him about the night he'd witnessed Blackwell shoot Robert Hayes in the back and dump his body over a cliff. Told him about Martha Collins, the widow Blackwell had left to die in the desert 2 years ago. I ran. Raphael's voice was rough with shame. I saw what he did to Hayes, and I knew if I stayed, eventually he'd make me do the same. So I stole a horse in the night and rode until I found your ranch. You gave me work and never asked questions. For 5 years, I have tried to be a good man, to make up for the bad years. Why tell me this now? Because if you protect Miss Claire, you will have to fight Blackwell. And when that happens, I will fight beside you. Raphael met Elias's eyes. I owe him a debt of blood for the things I saw and did not stop, and I owe you a debt of loyalty for the life you gave me when I was running scared. I am ready to die for this, patron, for you and for her, to make right what I helped make wrong. Elias looked at this man who'd worked beside him for 5 years. Loyal, hardworking, honest in every way that mattered. The past didn't erase that, didn't change who Raphael had become. Then we stand together, Elias said and offered his hand. Raphael shook it, and something like relief passed over his weathered features. That afternoon, while Elias was checking the horses, Claire found him in the barn. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. There's something I need to tell you, she said. About Blackwell. About why I really offered you that deal. Elias guided her to a hay bale and sat beside her. Waited. He touched me, Claire whispered. Before the desert. At his party when everyone was watching. He kissed me, forced his mouth on mine while 200 people stood there. I pushed him away, but later he followed me outside, grabbed me from behind, put his hands on me, whispered things. Her voice cracked. I've never told anyone this, but when I close my eyes, I can still feel his hands. Still smell his breath. And I hate it. I hate that he marked me like that. She looked up at Elias with eyes full of tears and fury. That's why I offered you 3 times a day, not just to pay you back, but because I needed to replace those memories. I needed to let someone I trusted touch me so I could remember what it felt like to be touched with kindness instead of violence. Does that make sense? Elias pulled her close, holding her while she cried. It makes perfect sense. And for what it's worth, you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. I don't feel brave. I feel broken. Broken things can heal, Elias said. They just need time and someone to help hold the pieces together until they do. Claire cried for a long time. Elias just held her, one hand stroking her hair, and wished he could kill Gideon Blackwell with his bare hands. They had 4 more days until Marshal Wade arrived. 4 more days to survive. But as Elias looked at Claire, at this fierce woman who'd chosen death over submission, he made a silent vow. Whatever came next, however this ended, Blackwell would never touch her again, even if Elias had to die to make sure of it. The 11th day dawned hot and still, the kind of weather that made men irritable and horses skittish. Elias woke before sunrise, his body trained by decades of military discipline to recognize danger before his conscious mind caught up. Something felt wrong. The air tasted different, charged with tension that had nothing to do with the coming heat. Claire still slept beside him, her breathing deep and steady. For a moment, Elias just watched her, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her hair spread across the pillow. If things went bad in the next few days, he wanted to remember this, wanted to carry the image of her peaceful face with him into whatever came next. He slipped out of bed without waking her, dressed quickly, and stepped onto the porch. The ranch spread out before him in shades of purple and gray, the sun not yet high enough to burn away the shadows. Everything looked normal. The horse barn stood solid. The corral gate remained latched. No sign of intruders. But Elias's instincts, honed by years of combat, screamed at him that they were being watched. Raphael emerged from the bunkhouse, rifle already in hand. The older man's face told Elias he felt it too. "They're out there," Raphael said quietly in Spanish. "I can feel eyes on us." Elias nodded. "Check the cattle. I'll check the water sources. Don't go more than a quarter mile from the house." They split up, moving with the careful awareness of men who knew they might be walking into an ambush. Elias saddled Duchess and rode out to the small pond where his 40 head of cattle drank. The animals stood clustered together, more agitated than usual. Several were already dead, lying on their sides near the water's edge. Elias dismounted and examined the nearest corpse. The cow's mouth was foaming, eyes rolled back, body already stiff with rigor mortis. He knelt beside the pond and smelled the water. Faint chemical odor, bitter almonds, arsenic, the same poison Blackwell had used on William Donovan's cattle 2 years ago. The same method, the same casual cruelty, destroying a man's livelihood as easily as pouring powder into water. Elias pulled a small bottle from his saddlebag and collected a water sample. Evidence for Marshall Wade. Another crime to add to the growing list. As he stood, movement caught his eye. 2 riders on the eastern ridge, maybe 400 yards distant. Too far for accurate rifle work, but close enough to send a message. They sat their horses in full view, making no effort to hide. Elias pulled his telescope from the saddlebag and trained it on them. Both wore dusters and broad-brimmed hats. Both carried rifles across their saddles. One raised a hand in mock salute. Then they wheeled their horses and disappeared over the ridge. The message was clear. "We know where you are. We're watching, and there's nothing you can do about it." Elias rode back to the ranch with rage burning in his chest like swallowed fire. Claire met him at the door, already dressed, coffee cup in hand. "What happened?" "Blackwell poisoned the water source. Killed 4 head, maybe more by now." Elias dismounted heavily. "And he's got men watching us, 2 on the east ridge." Claire's cup trembled in her hand. "He's testing us, seeing how we react." "More than that," Raphael said, emerging from the barn. "He's trying to provoke you into leaving the ranch. If you go after his men, he can ambush you. If you stay here, he can pick away at you bit by bit. Psychological warfare." Elias had seen the tactic before during the Apache campaigns. Pin your enemy down, destroy his resources, wait for desperation to make him do something stupid. It was effective because it worked on the mind as much as the body. "We don't take the bait," Elias said. "We stay here. We stay together. And we wait for Wade. 3 more days. We can last 3 more days." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. 3 days was a long time when your enemy controlled the ground around you. That afternoon, as Elias was repairing fence posts near the house, Claire brought him water. She'd been quieter than usual all morning, her eyes distant and worried. "I've been thinking," she said. "Maybe I should just go to him. End this before anyone else gets hurt." Elias set down the post hole digger and turned to face her. "No." "But Elias, he's destroying your ranch. He killed your cattle. He's going to keep hurting you until I give in. Maybe if I just—" "No," Elias repeated, more firmly. "You listen to me, Claire Donovan. What Blackwell is doing isn't about you anymore. It's about power, about proving that he can take whatever he wants whenever he wants it. If you go to him now, you think he'll just forgive and forget? You think he won't punish you for embarrassing him?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want you to die because of me." Elias cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "I'm not dying, and neither are you. We're going to survive this together. And then we're going to watch Blackwell hang for his crimes. That's how this ends, not with you sacrificing yourself to a monster." She leaned into him, and he held her there in the afternoon heat, both of them pretending they believed his confident words. The attack came at 3 in the morning on the 12th day. Elias was on watch, sitting in the rocking chair on the porch with the Winchester across his lap. Raphael had the midnight to 2 shift, Elias had 2 to 4, Then Raphael would take over again until dawn. It was exhausting, running on 4 hours of broken sleep, but they had no choice. The first warning was the sound of breaking glass. A rock the size of a man's fist came through the parlor window, trailing a piece of paper tied with string. It hit the floor with a heavy thud that brought Elias to his feet, rifle raised. Claire appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a sheet, eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" "Stay back," Elias ordered. He picked up the rock carefully, untied the paper, and read the message scrawled in rough pencil. 24 hours. He'd barely processed the words when the shooting started. 5 riders emerged from the darkness, circling the house at a distance of about 150 yards. They fired revolvers into the air, whooping and hollering like it was all a game. The noise was designed to terrify, to rob sleep, to make the people inside feel hunted. Elias didn't waste ammunition shooting back at moving targets in the dark. Instead, he took careful aim at the horse of the nearest rider and squeezed the trigger. The Winchester barked once. The horse screamed and went down, throwing its rider hard into the dirt. The man's leg snapped with an audible crack, his screams joining the chaos. "Fire into the house," someone shouted. Elias recognized the voice even before he saw the speaker, Gideon Blackwell himself, sitting a big black stallion just outside the light from the windows. Suddenly, the night exploded with gunfire. Bullets slammed into the wooden walls of the house, tearing through the pine logs like paper. Elias threw himself flat as lead whined overhead. Glass shattered, wood splintered, the air filled with the smell of gunpowder and dust. "Claire," Elias shouted. "Get down! Get to the root cellar!" But Claire had her own ideas about survival. She appeared at the back window with Elias's Colt, aimed with both hands the way he'd taught her, and fired 3 quick shots. One of the riders jerked and fell from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. Raphael burst from the bunkhouse with his 12-gauge shotgun, firing both barrels toward the attackers. The buckshot caught one man in the chest at 40 yards, lifting him clear off his horse. For 5 minutes, the ranch became a war zone. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness. Horses screamed, men shouted. The smell of blood and burnt powder filled the air. Then, as suddenly as it started, the shooting stopped. The remaining riders wheeled their horses and galloped into the darkness, leaving 2 wounded men behind, one with a broken leg, one with buckshot in his chest. The latter wouldn't see sunrise. Blackwell's voice echoed across the distance. "We'll be back, Mercer. You can't keep her forever." Elias stood slowly, ears ringing, heart pounding. He did a quick count of bullet holes in the walls. 17. Any one of them could have killed Claire or Raphael. They'd been lucky, incredibly lucky. Claire emerged from the back room, still holding the Colt. Her hands were rock steady, but her face was pale as milk. "Did I kill him? The man I shot?" "You hit him in the shoulder," Elias said. "He'll live." "I don't know if I'm relieved or disappointed." She set the gun down carefully. "Is this what war feels like? This constant fear?" "This is exactly what war feels like," Elias confirmed. "The waiting is worse than the fighting. At least during a fight, you know what's happening." Raphael dragged the man with buckshot in his chest inside, not out of mercy but to question him. But the man was already fading, blood pooling beneath him. He died before he could say a word. The man with the broken leg they left where he'd fallen. Come morning, his friends could retrieve him. Or not. Elias found he didn't much care either way. As dawn broke over the ranch, revealing the full extent of the damage, Elias surveyed their situation with a military eye. The house looked like it had been through a battle, which it had. 2 windows shot out, walls pockmarked with bullet holes, the front door hanging crooked on its hinges. But they'd survived. All 3 of them, without a scratch. 2 more days. Elias said to no one in particular. Just 2 more days. On the 13th day, exhaustion became their biggest enemy. Elias hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in 4 days. His hands shook when he poured coffee. His eyes burned. His reflexes, normally sharp, had slowed to the point where he worried about his ability to fight if Blackwell came again. Claire was in better shape, but not by much. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she jumped at every sound, every creak of the house settling. Only Raphael seemed unaffected, running on some reserve of endurance that Elias envied. The older man moved through the day like a machine, checking perimeters, cleaning weapons, preparing for the next assault. They didn't leave the house except to tend the horses. They ate cold food to avoid smoke from cooking fires. They spoke in whispers, as if Blackwell's men might hear them from miles away. The isolation and fear were weapons as effective as bullets. Around noon, as Claire was trying to get Elias to eat some jerky and hardtack, they heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. A single rider coming from the direction of Wilcox. Elias grabbed his Winchester and moved to the window. Too far to identify, but riding with purpose. Raphael. Elias called. Second window. If this goes bad, we fire together. But as the rider got closer, Elias recognized the horse, a brown mare with a white blaze. That was Harrison's mount, the telegraph operator from Wilcox. The man reined up outside the fence line, staying well back, hands raised to show he was unarmed. Mr. Mercer, he called. I have a message from Marshal Wade. Important message. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle held across his chest. Read it from there. Harrison pulled a telegram from his pocket and shouted the words. Train delayed. Stop will arrive, evening of 16th, not morning. Stop hold position. Stop help coming. Stop Wade. The words hit Elias like a physical blow. Not morning. Evening. That was an extra 12 hours. 12 hours that felt like a lifetime when men were trying to kill you. You got that? Harrison called. I got it, Elias shouted back. You tell anyone else about this telegram? No, sir. Came straight here. Good. Now get out of here before Blackwell's men see you and think you're helping us. Harrison needed no further encouragement. He wheeled his horse and galloped back toward town. Elias stood on the porch long after the man disappeared, feeling the weight of those extra 12 hours settle on his shoulders like stones. Behind him, he heard Claire's sharp intake of breath. She'd been listening. Evening, she said quietly. That means we have to survive all of tomorrow, too. We'll make it, Elias said, but even he didn't believe it. That afternoon, Claire found him sitting on the porch, head in his hands. She sat beside him without speaking, just her presence offering comfort. I'm sorry, she finally said. For what? For bringing this to your door. Your ranch is destroyed, your cattle are dead, you're fighting a war because you were kind enough to save me. Elias turned to look at her. Claire, listen to me carefully. I've lived on this land for 15 years. Built this house with my own hands, lost my wife here. I thought I'd die here alone, just another old man the desert forgot. He paused, gathering words. But then you showed up and reminded me what it feels like to have something worth protecting, worth fighting for. So don't you dare apologize. You gave me back my life. Claire's eyes filled with tears. I love you, Elias Mercer. I know I'm supposed to wait for you to say it first, but I don't care about those rules. I love you, and if we die tomorrow, I want you to know that. Elias kissed her then, deep and long, tasting salt from her tears. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you too, and we're not dying tomorrow. We're going to survive this, get married, and grow old together, annoying our grandchildren. That's a promise? Claire laughed, the sound watery but genuine. You better keep that promise, old man. I always keep my promises, Elias said. That night, they didn't make love. They were too exhausted, too worried about the coming day. Instead, they just held each other, drawing strength from simple proximity. Claire fell asleep in Elias's arms, and he stayed awake, listening to her breathe, memorizing the weight and warmth of her. Raphael kept watch outside, a shadow moving through deeper shadows. But something gnawed at Elias as he lay there in the darkness. Something about Anna's death that had never quite made sense. The speed of it. The timing. She'd been healthy one day, dead 3 days later. And it had been right after Elias had testified against a man named Carson in a land dispute. Carson had worked for Blackwell. The thought slithered through his mind like a snake. Had Anna's death been natural? Or had Blackwell been operating in this county even longer than anyone suspected, eliminating obstacles, silencing witnesses? Elias pushed the thought away, but it left a bitter taste in his mouth. Some questions once asked couldn't be unasked. On the 14th day, Gideon Blackwell showed his hand. Dawn came gray and threatening, clouds building over the mountains to the west. Rain would be a blessing after weeks of drought, but it would also provide cover for attackers. Reduced visibility worked both ways. Elias was checking the horses when Raphael came running from the south fence line, moving faster than Elias had seen him move in years. Patron, the cattle, all of them. Elias followed Raphael to the southern pasture and felt his stomach drop. The remaining 36 head of cattle lay dead, scattered across the grass like discarded toys. Throats cut. Systematic slaughter. It must have happened during the night while they were all inside or watching the house. Blackwell's men had moved through the darkness like ghosts, killing Elias's livelihood without making a sound. "This is psychological warfare," Raphael said. "He's showing you that he can take everything, that walls and guns won't stop him." Elias's hands clenched into fists. The cattle represented years of work, thousands of dollars, his entire income for the coming year. Blackwell had just destroyed him financially with the stroke of a knife. Except Elias didn't care about the money anymore, didn't care about the cattle. All he cared about was keeping Claire alive for one more day. "Let's get back to the house," he said quietly. "This is meant to draw us out. I'm not taking the bait." But when they returned, they found Claire standing on the porch with a piece of paper in her hand. Her face had gone white as bone. It was tied to the door, she said, voice hollow, nailed there like Martin Luther's thesis. Elias took the paper and read, "Mercer, by now you've seen what I did to your cattle. Tonight, if Claire doesn't walk out of that house by midnight, I'll burn it to the ground with all of you inside. The choice is yours. You can keep your pride and die, or you can give me what's mine and live. You have 12 hours. G. Blackwell." Elias crumpled the paper in his fist. "He's bluffing." "Is he?" Claire asked. "Elias, he killed 36 cattle just to make a point. You think he won't burn the house? If he burns us out, we'll fight in the open. He knows that. He's trying to scare us into doing something stupid. Maybe the stupid thing is staying here." Claire's voice had taken on a desperate edge. "Maybe we should run. Take the horses and ride for Bisbee or Tucson. Get out of Blackwell's territory." Elias shook his head. "This is my land, my home. I'm not running." "Then you're going to die for dirt," Claire shouted, and it was the first time she'd raised her voice at him. "Is that worth it? Is your pride worth more than your life?" "It's not about pride." Elias tried to keep his voice level. "It's about what happens if we run. Blackwell will hunt us. He has the men, the money, the connections. We'd be looking over our shoulders for the rest of our lives. The only way this ends is if we stand our ground until Wade arrives. One more day, Claire. That's all we need." Claire's shoulders slumped. "And if we don't make it, then we don't. But at least we'll die free." The words sounded braver than Elias felt. Truth was, he was terrified. Not for himself. He'd made peace with death a long time ago, but for Claire. For this fierce, brilliant woman who deserved a lifetime of happiness, not a shallow grave in the Arizona desert. As noon approached and the temperature climbed, the three of them prepared for what they knew was coming. Elias had fought enough battles to recognize the signs. Blackwell was done playing games. Tonight would be the final assault. They moved ammunition into the house, filled every container they could find with water in case of fire, soaked blankets, and hung them over the windows to slow flames. Turned the house into a fortress. Raphael pulled Elias aside while Claire was in the back room. "Patron, I have been thinking. If it comes to fighting tonight, I should make a run for Wilcox. Bring the law. The sheriff is bought by Blackwell. You know that. Then I will bring citizens. Armed men who are tired of Blackwell's tyranny. There are good people in that town, Elias. People who would stand with us if they knew what was happening." Elias considered it. The ranch was 12 miles from town. If Raphael left at dusk, rode hard, he could be there in 90 minutes, could potentially return with help before midnight. or he could be shot off his horse before he made it a mile. It's too dangerous, Elias said finally. Everything is dangerous now, Raphael replied. But doing nothing is most dangerous of all. Let me go, Patron. Let me do this one thing that might save us. Before Elias could answer, Claire screamed from inside the house. Both men ran. They found her standing at the back window, pointing with a shaking hand. 4 of their 6 horses lay dead in the corral. Duchess and Duke, the only survivors, stood trembling in the corner. When? Elias demanded. When did this happen? Just now, Claire said. I was watching. Men came over the back fence, cut the horses' throats. I fired at them but missed. The tactical situation had just gotten infinitely worse. Without horses, they couldn't run even if they wanted to. Couldn't send for help. Couldn't do anything but wait for Blackwell to make his move. And Blackwell knew it. This was his checkmate. He'd boxed them in and was now closing the trap. Tonight, Raphael said quietly. He'll come tonight. Elias nodded. We make our stand, all 3 of us together. They spent the rest of the afternoon in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Elias cleaned and loaded every weapon in the house. 21 rounds for the Winchester, 8 rounds for the Colt, 6 shells for the shotgun. Raphael's rifle held another 15 rounds. Not much ammunition for a prolonged fight, but it would have to do. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the desert in shades of blood red and gold, Claire came to Elias. She'd changed into pants and a shirt of his, practical clothing for fighting. Her hair was pulled back tight, the Colt belted around her waist. She looked like a soldier preparing for battle. Whatever happens tonight, she said, I want you to know something. These past 2 weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. You gave me back my freedom, my dignity, my sense of self. If I die tonight, I die knowing what it feels like to be truly loved. That's more than most people get. Elias pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, trying to memorize every detail. You're not going to die. I won't let you. You can't promise that. Watch me. They stood together as darkness fell over the ranch, 2 people facing impossible odds, refusing to surrender. Blackwell came at 10 o'clock, 2 hours before his deadline. Elias saw them first, a line of riders silhouetted against the moonlit horizon. He counted 10 men on horseback, moving slowly, deliberately, knowing they'd won before the fight even started. Gideon Blackwell rode at the center on his big black stallion. Even from a distance, Elias could see the man's confidence, the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no and meant it. They stopped 100 yards from the house, just outside accurate rifle range. Blackwell dismounted and took a few steps forward, hands clasped behind his back like a general surveying a battlefield. Mercer, he called, his voice carrying easily in the still night air. Let's talk like reasonable men. No need for more bloodshed. Elias stepped onto the porch, Winchester held ready but not aimed. I've got nothing to say to you, Blackwell. I think you do, Blackwell replied. You fought bravely, I'll give you that. Protected the lady like a knight from the old stories. But we both know how this ends. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. So let's make a deal. I don't deal with men who poison cattle and murder women. Careful with your accusations, Mercer. Those are serious charges. Blackwell's voice carried amusement now. But I'm a generous man. Here's my final offer. Send Claire out right now, and I'll let you and your Mexican live. You have my word as a gentleman. From inside the house, Claire's voice rang out, clear and defiant. I'd rather burn. Blackwell's expression darkened, visible even at this distance. That can be arranged. You think these walls will protect you? I'll burn you out like rats in a barn. Last chance, Mercer. Be smart. Elias raised the Winchester and aimed it directly at Blackwell's chest. Here's my answer. Come and try. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then Blackwell smiled, a predator's expression, and raised one hand. 4 of his men dismounted and pulled bottles from their saddlebags. Elias recognized them immediately. Kerosene bombs, cloth stuffed in the necks, ready to light and throw. Burn them out, Blackwell ordered. The men lit their bottles from torches and threw. 2 bottles arced through the air and crashed against the front of the house. 2 more hit the sides. Kerosene splashed across wooden walls, and flames erupted with a hungry roar. In seconds, the house was burning. Out the back. Elias shouted, "Move now!" They burst through the back door into a hail of gunfire. Blackwell had positioned 3 men there, waiting for exactly this. Raphael fired his shotgun twice, dropping 1 man, but bullets whined past Elias's head, close enough to feel the wind of their passage. Claire fired the Colt, 3 quick shots that drove the attackers to cover. It was just enough time for all 3 of them to reach the water trough 30 feet from the house. They dove behind it as gunfire intensified. Bullets slammed into the wooden trough, punching through and sending water spraying. The trough wouldn't provide cover for long. Behind them, the house was fully engulfed now, flames reaching into the night sky. 10 years of Elias's life burning. Anna's memory burning. Everything he'd built turning to ash. But Elias didn't look back. He focused forward, on survival, on protecting the woman beside him. "Horse barn," he shouted. "We can ford up there. Move when I say." He raised the Winchester and fired 3 quick shots toward the attackers, buying seconds. Raphael grabbed Claire and ran, half dragging her toward the barn 60 yards away. Elias laid down covering fire, walking backward, shooting at muzzle flashes. One of Blackwell's men made the mistake of standing up to get a better shot. Elias's bullet caught him center mass, spinning him around. The man fell and didn't get up. "Patron," Raphael's voice from the barn. "We're in." Elias turned and sprinted, legs pumping, lungs burning. Bullets kicked up dust at his feet. Something tugged at his shirt, a bullet passing so close it tore the fabric but missed flesh. He dove through the barn door, and Raphael slammed it shut behind him. They shoved a feed bin against it for extra weight, then took up positions at the windows. Elias did a quick inventory. 21 rounds in the Winchester, now down to 15. 8 rounds in the Colt. Raphael had maybe 10 rounds left for his rifle. Claire's Colt was down to 3 rounds. Not enough, not nearly enough for what was coming. "They'll rush us," Raphael said calmly, stating fact without emotion. "They know we're low on ammunition. They'll wait a few minutes to let us worry. Then they'll come all at once." Claire reloaded the Colt with shaking hands. "How many did we get?" 2 dead for sure," Elias said. "Maybe 1 wounded. That leaves 7 or 8 healthy fighters plus Blackwell. Not good odds." "No," Elias agreed, "not good at all." They waited in tense silence, listening to Blackwell's men move around outside. Heard them talking, planning. Heard Blackwell giving orders in that confident voice. Then, inevitably, they heard something that made Elias's blood run cold. Hoofbeats, but not departing. Circling, getting closer. "They're going to rush us," Raphael confirmed. All of them at once. Elias positioned himself at the front window, Raphael at the side, Claire covering the back. This was it. The last stand. Win or die. "Claire," Elias said quietly, "if this goes bad, if they get in here, you take Duke and ride. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just ride east until you find help. I'm not leaving you." "Claire, you have to—" "I don't take orders from you, Elias Mercer," Claire said flatly. "We survive together or we die together. Those are the only options." Elias wanted to argue, but there was no time. The hoofbeats were thundering now, coming fast. He raised the Winchester, sighted down the barrel, and waited. The first rider burst around the corner of the burning house. Riding hard, rifle raised. Elias let him by a fraction and squeezed the trigger. The Winchester bucked. The man jerked, and both horse and rider went down in a tangle of thrashing limbs. 2 more riders came from the left. Raphael's rifle cracked twice. One rider clutched his shoulder and wheeled away. The other kept coming, firing wildly. Claire shot through the back window, her bullet catching another attacker in the leg. The man screamed and fell from his horse. For 3 minutes, the barn became the center of hell. Gunfire from all sides, bullets punching through wood, the smell of gun smoke and blood thick in the air. Elias fired until his Winchester clicked empty. Dropped it, pulled his Colt, kept shooting. Beside him, Raphael did the same. They were going to die here. Elias knew it. But they'd die fighting, and they'd take as many of Blackwell's men with them as possible. Just as Elias's Colt clicked on an empty chamber, just as he reached for Raphael's Bowie knife to make his last stand with cold steel, a new sound cut through the chaos. A bugle. The cavalry charge, sharp and clear and impossible. Then gunfire from a new direction. Disciplined. Controlled. Military precise. Elias risked a look out the window and saw something he'd thought he'd never see. Marshal Thomas Wade and 3 deputies riding hard, rifles blazing. Federal officers. Wade's voice boomed across the battlefield. "Lay down your weapons. You're all under arrest." Blackwell's remaining men broke immediately. Some threw down their guns and raised their hands. Others tried to run and were shot from their saddles by Wade's deputies. Blackwell himself stood frozen, face gone white, as he realized his carefully planned attack had just turned into his own capture. Wade reined his horse up beside Blackwell and aimed a rifle at the man's chest. "Gideon Blackwell, you're under arrest for murder, attempted murder, and about 6 other charges. You so much as breathe wrong, I'll blow you in half." Blackwell opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Elias stumbled out of the barn on shaking legs. Claire was right behind him, followed by Raphael. They stood there, covered in soot and blood and gunpowder residue, watching as Wade's deputies rounded up Blackwell's men. Wade dismounted and walked over to Elias. The 2 men stared at each other for a long moment. Then Wade broke into a smile. "You look like hell, Lieutenant. You're 12 hours early, Marshal," Elias replied. "Not that I'm complaining. Train got in early, something about new locomotives. I figured you could use the help sooner rather than later." Wade looked at the B-54 house, the dead horses, the bodies. "Looks like I was right." Elias turned to Claire, who stood there with tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of relief so profound it bordered on disbelief. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." Elias pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried. Behind them, the house collapsed in on itself with a roar of flame and falling timber. Everything Elias owned, gone. But he'd kept his promise. He'd protected her. And sometimes that was all that mattered. Marshal Thomas Wade supervised the arrest of Gideon Blackwell personally, making sure to read out every single charge as he locked the shackles around the man's wrists. Blackwell said nothing at first, just stared at Claire with eyes full of rage and humiliation. "You'll regret this," he finally said. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Wade replied. "A coward who tried to murder a woman because she wouldn't marry him. The judge is going to love that story." As deputies led Blackwell away, the man looked back at Claire one last time. "She's mine," he shouted. "Mine by right. Her father owed me." "People aren't property," Wade said flatly. "You're about to learn that lesson the hard way." When the prisoners were secure and the deputies had begun the grim work of dealing with the bodies, Wade pulled Elias and Claire aside. "I need you both in Tucson for the trial," he said. "We've got a strong case, but your testimony will seal it. Can you be there in 6 weeks?" "We'll be there," Elias promised. Wade nodded, then looked at the ruins of the house. "Where will you stay until then?" "I'll rebuild," Elias said. "It's what I do." "We'll rebuild," Claire corrected, taking his hand. Wade smiled. "I'll leave 2 deputies here for the next week, just in case Blackwell has any friends who might cause trouble. After that, you should be safe." As dawn broke over the ranch, painting the ruins in shades of gray and gold, Elias stood with his arm around Claire and surveyed what was left. The house was gone, the barn was riddled with bullet holes, the cattle were dead. By any measure, he'd lost everything, except he hadn't. He still had Claire, still had Raphael who'd fought beside him like a brother, still had land and hands to work it and time to rebuild. "What do you want to do first?" Claire asked. Elias looked down at her. This woman who'd come into his life tied to a cross and left him freer than he'd been in 10 years. "First," he said, "I want to bury Raphael." Claire's face fell. Raphael? But he's right there. He's fine. Elias shook his head slowly. During the fight, in the chaos and smoke, he'd seen Raphael take a bullet, seen the older man clutch his chest and go down. Elias had been too busy fighting to check, too desperate to survive. Now, as the adrenaline faded, he looked toward where Raphael had been standing. The older man sat with his back against the barn wall, hand pressed to his chest, blood seeping between his fingers. His face was pale but peaceful. Elias ran to him, Claire right behind. Raphael looked up at them and smiled. "Did we win, Patron?" "We won," Elias said, tears streaming down his face. "We won, hermano." "Good." Raphael breathed, voice already getting weaker. "That is good. Tell Miss Claire, tell her I died a good man. That matters. That I was a good man at the end." "You were always a good man," Claire said, kneeling beside him. "Always." Raphael's eyes were drifting closed now. "The tree," he whispered. "Bury me under the oak tree with Anna." "With the good people, I promise," Elias said. But Raphael was already gone. They sat there with him as the sun rose, two survivors holding vigil for the man who'd given everything so they could have a future. They buried Rafael Ortega under the white oak tree at noon on the 16th of July, 1983. The same tree that sheltered Anna's grave, its gnarled roots deep in Arizona soil, its branches offering shade in a land that showed no mercy to the living or the dead. Elias carved the headstone himself from a thick piece of walnut wood, working through the night by lamplight while Claire slept fitfully in the barn. His hands, still shaking from exhaustion and battle, guided the chisel with painstaking care. Every letter mattered. Every word was a promise kept. Rafael Ortega, 1945-1983. Loyal friend, brave warrior, good man. Marshal Wade stood beside them as Elias and Claire lowered Raphael's body into the earth. The two deputies Wade had left behind removed their hats and bowed their heads. Even in death, Raphael commanded respect. Elias read from Psalms, the 23rd, the same words he'd spoken over Anna's grave 10 years ago. His voice cracked on the familiar phrases, the valley of the shadow of death. No fear of evil, goodness, and mercy. Claire placed wildflowers on the fresh dirt, Arizona poppies, bright orange against the dark soil. Raphael had loved color in this brown landscape, had planted flowers around the bunkhouse every spring, tending them with the same care he gave to horses. "He saved my life," Claire said quietly. "Threw himself at that man so I could escape. I'll never forget that." "He died for honor," Elias replied. "Died trying to make right what he thought he'd done wrong. That's all any man can ask for. To die better than he lived." They stood there until the sun climbed high and merciless, then walked back to the barn where they'd been sleeping since the house burned. Everything Elias owned fit in 2 saddlebags now. Clothes, a few tools, Anna's Bible, the deed to his land. A lifetime reduced to things you could carry on horseback. But he had Claire. And strange as it seemed, that made him richer than he'd been when he had a house full of possessions and a heart full of loneliness. That afternoon, while Claire rested in the shade, Elias walked the perimeter of his property with Wade. The marshal had been putting off this conversation, Elias could tell, waiting for the right moment. Now, with Raphael in the ground and Claire safe, the time had come. "How bad did Blackwell hurt you financially?" Wade asked. Elias surveyed the burned house, the dead cattle, the poisoned water. Lost about 2,000 in livestock and buildings, another 500 in equipment. The land is still worth something, maybe 3,000 if I sold. But I'm not selling. Didn't figure you would. Wade pulled out his tobacco pouch and rolled a cigarette with practiced efficiency. "You know, Blackwell is going to claim you attacked him. That all this was self-defense on his part. Can he make that stick? With the right lawyer and a sympathetic judge?" "Maybe." Wade lit the cigarette and exhaled slowly. "But we've got something he doesn't. We've got Raphael's dying declaration, we've got Claire's testimony, we've got 2 of his men we captured who are willing to talk in exchange for reduced sentences, and we've got 4 dead bodies with Blackwell's bullets in them. You think he'll hang? I think he'll spend the rest of his life in Yuma Territorial Prison, which might be worse than hanging. Wade looked at Elias seriously. But here's what I need you to understand. The trial is going to be rough. Blackwell's lawyers will tear into Claire. They'll try to make her look like a loose woman who seduced you, then cried assault when things went bad. They'll bring up your age difference. They'll ask about that 3 times a day promise she made. Elias's jaw tightened. They better watch their mouths. They won't. That's their job. To make the jury doubt Claire's story. To make Blackwell look like the victim of a scheming woman. Wade put a hand on Elias's shoulder. I'm telling you this now so you can prepare her. Testifying is going to be the hardest thing she's ever done. Harder than being left to die in the desert? In some ways, yes. Because this time she'll have to relive it in front of strangers who will judge her for surviving. Elias spent that evening preparing Claire for what was coming. They sat on a log near Raphael's grave, watching the sun set over the mountains, while Elias explained how trials worked, how lawyers would twist her words, how the judge might allow questions that felt like assault all over again. They're going to ask about us, Elias said carefully. About what happened after I brought you here. About your promise. Claire's face hardened. Let them ask. I'm not ashamed. I know you're not. But they'll try to make it sound sordid, like you prostituted yourself. I didn't prostitute myself, Claire said fiercely. I made a choice, the first real choice I'd made in years. And I'd make it again. I just want you to know what's coming so you're ready. Claire turned to face him fully. Elias, I've been tied to a cross under the desert sun. I've been shot at. I've killed a man to protect myself. Do you really think a lawyer's questions are going to break me? Elias smiled, despite himself. No, I don't suppose they will. Good. Because I'm going to look that judge in the eye and tell him exactly what Gideon Blackwell did to me, to my father, to those other women. And when I'm done, there won't be a doubt in anyone's mind about who the monster is. They made love that night on a blanket under the stars, the burned ruins of the house a shadow against the moon. It wasn't about the promise anymore, hadn't been for a long time. It was about 2 people finding comfort and connection in the aftermath of violence. Afterward, lying in Elias's arms, Claire said something that had been building for days. Marry me. Elias went still. What? You heard me. Marry me before we go to Tucson, before the trial. I want to stand up in that courtroom as your wife, not your mistress or your victim or whatever other thing they try to call me. I want to be Claire Mercer when I testify against Gideon Blackwell. Claire, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, she interrupted. I want to. Unless you don't want to marry me. Of course I want to marry you, but I have nothing to offer. No house, no money, nothing but debt and a burned-out ranch. Claire propped herself up on one elbow and looked down at him. You're offering me freedom, choice, love, that's worth more than any house. So I'll ask again. Elias Mercer, will you marry me? Elias pulled her down and kissed her deeply. Yes. God, yes. They were married 3 days later in the small church in Wilcox. Reverend Wesley performed the ceremony, a kindly old man who'd known Anna and approved of Elias finding happiness again. Marshal Wade stood as witness, along with the 2 deputies and a handful of townspeople who'd heard what Blackwell had done and wanted to show their support. The church was half full, which surprised Elias. He'd thought the town would be too afraid of Blackwell's reach to attend. But Blackwell was in chains now, his power broken. And people who'd been silent for years suddenly found their voices. Claire wore a simple cotton dress, white as she could manage given the circumstances. Someone had donated it, a widow woman whose own daughter had died years before. It fit Claire almost perfectly, needed only minor alteration at the waist. Elias wore the only suit he owned, the one he'd worn to Anna's funeral. He'd brushed the dust from it and hoped Anna would forgive him for wearing it to his second wedding. The ceremony was brief. Reverend Wesley read from Corinthians about love being patient and kind, asked them to make their vows. Elias's voice shook when he promised to love and protect Claire until death. Claire's didn't waver at all. When Reverend Wesley pronounced them husband and wife, the small congregation applauded. It felt like defiance, this public celebration. Blackwell had tried to force Claire into marriage and failed. Now she was married on her own terms, to a man she'd chosen freely. That night in the barn that served as their temporary home, they consummated their marriage as free people. No promises hanging over them, no obligations except the ones they chose. Just a man and a woman who'd survived hell together and decided to build heaven out of the ashes. Mrs. Mercer, Elias whispered against her hair. Mr. Mercer, Claire replied and laughed with pure joy. The next morning, Claire's father arrived. William Donovan rode up to the ranch on a borrowed mule, looking 10 years older than when Elias had last seen him. The man had lost weight, his face gaunt with worry, but his eyes were clear. When he dismounted, he stood straight. Claire ran to him. "Papa!" They embraced for a long time, both crying. When they finally separated, William turned to Elias and extended his hand. "Mr. Mercer, I owe you my daughter's life. I can never repay that debt." Elias shook his hand firmly. "You don't owe me anything, but I'm glad you're here." William looked at the burned house, the graves under the oak tree, the bullet-scarred barn. "Blackwell did all this?" "Blackwell did all this," Elias confirmed. "Then I'll testify against him. I'll tell the court everything. How he poisoned my cattle, how he forged those loan documents, how he threatened to kill me if Claire didn't marry him." William's voice grew stronger with each word. "I've been a coward, Mr. Mercer. Let my fear put my daughter in danger. But I'm done being afraid. Blackwell is going to pay for what he did." Over the next few weeks, as they waited for the trial date, the three of them worked to rebuild. Elias couldn't afford to reconstruct the house yet, but they could clear the rubble, salvage what was salvageable, make plans for the future. Claire proved surprisingly capable with tools. She'd watched her father work for years, absorbed more than either of them realized. She could hammer nails straight, cut boards to measure, mix mortar for the foundation they'd eventually need. William stayed in the barn with them, sleeping on a cot in the corner. At first it was awkward, a father living with his newly married daughter and son-in-law. But the work smoothed over the discomfort. Shared labor had a way of making family out of strangers. One evening, as they sat around a small fire, eating beans and cornbread, William told them the full story of how Blackwell had entrapped him. "It started 2 years ago," William said. "My cattle started dying. Just a few at first, then more and more. The vet couldn't figure it out, said it might be some new disease. I was losing 20, 30 head a month. By the end, I'd lost almost my whole herd. That's when Blackwell appeared," Claire said. "It wasn't a question. That's when Blackwell appeared," William confirmed. "Offered to buy my land for half what it was worth. Said he was doing me a favor, taking it off my hands before I lost everything. I said no, told him I'd rebuild. So he offered you the loan," Elias said. "So he offered me the loan. $2,500 at 10% interest. Seemed fair at the time. I signed without reading carefully." William's face twisted with shame. "That's the mistake that almost killed my daughter. Those papers said 40%, compounded monthly. By the time I realized, I owed over $5,000. "Did you keep the original loan documents?" Elias asked. "I did. They're in a lockbox at the bank." "Why?" "Because those documents prove fraud. Wade needs to see them." The next day, they rode into Wilcox together, the three of them on Duchess and Duke and William's borrowed mule. Marshal Wade was staying at the hotel, coordinating with his deputies and preparing the case against Blackwell. When William showed him the loan documents, Wade's face broke into a satisfied smile. "This is beautiful," he said. "See here?" The interest rate was written in different ink. Someone changed it after William signed. Probably Blackwell himself, thinking a simple rancher wouldn't notice. "Can you prove it in court?" Claire asked. "I can try. We'll need a handwriting expert, maybe a chemist to analyze the inks. But yes, this helps tremendously." Wade looked at William with new respect. You keeping these documents might have just sealed Blackwell's fate. The trial was set for the first week of September, 6 weeks after the attack on Elias's ranch. That gave them time to prepare, to gather evidence, to line up witnesses. But it also gave them time to worry. Blackwell had hired the most expensive lawyers in the territory, men from San Francisco and Denver, sharp-suited predators who specialized in getting guilty men acquitted. They filed motion after motion, trying to get charges dismissed, trying to suppress evidence, trying to delay the trial indefinitely. But Judge William Barnes was having none of it. A stern man in his 60s, Barnes had a reputation for integrity that even Blackwell's money couldn't touch. He denied every spurious motion, kept the trial date firm, and made it clear that justice would be served in his courtroom. As summer turned to fall and the trial date approached, Elias and Claire made the journey to Tucson. 80 miles by horse, 3 days of travel. William came with them, and Marshal Wade and the 2 deputies who'd witnessed the final battle. They arrived in Tucson on a Wednesday evening, the city glowing gold in the setting sun. After weeks in the empty desert, the noise and crowds felt overwhelming. Claire clung to Elias's arm, eyes wide, taking in the bustling streets and tall buildings. Wade had arranged rooms for them at a modest hotel near the courthouse. Trial starts Monday, he told them. That gives you 4 days to rest and prepare. My advice, don't talk to anyone about the case. Blackwell's lawyers will have people watching, trying to trip you up. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time since the house burned, Claire turned to Elias in the darkness. I'm scared, she admitted, of the trial, of failing, of not being believed, of Blackwell going free because I can't convince 12 men that I'm telling the truth. Elias pulled her close. Claire, you're the strongest person I know. You're going to walk into that courtroom and tell your story, and those 12 men are going to believe every word. Because the truth has power, and you're wielding it like a weapon. What if they ask about us? About the 3 times a day thing? Then you tell them the truth, that you made a choice to survive? That's nothing to be ashamed of. Claire was quiet for a long time. Do you ever regret it? Taking me in, fighting Blackwell, losing everything. Not for a second, Elias said without hesitation. You know what I had before you? A house full of ghosts and a future that looked exactly like my past. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning, gave me something worth fighting for. I'd burn down 100 houses for that. I love you, Elias Mercer. I love you too, Claire Mercer. They made love quietly, mindful of the thin hotel walls, then fell asleep tangled together. Tomorrow would bring worry enough. Tonight they had each other. But as Elias drifted off, a thought nagged at him. Something Wade had mentioned weeks ago about Blackwell's history, about patterns of behavior going back further than anyone suspected. If Blackwell had been operating this way for years, eliminating obstacles and silencing witnesses, then how many other victims were there? And more troubling, had Anna really died of natural causes 10 years ago? Or had Blackwell's reach extended even that far back, touching Elias's life in ways he'd never imagined? The question haunted him as sleep finally claimed him, a shadow that would demand answers before this was all over. The trial of Gideon Blackwell began on Monday, September 3, 1983, in the federal courthouse of Arizona Territory. The courtroom was packed with spectators, newspapermen, curiosity seekers. Everyone wanted to see the powerful rancher brought low. Blackwell sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, flanked by his 3 lawyers. He looked calm, almost bored, as if this was merely an inconvenience to be endured. His eyes found Claire in the gallery and held her gaze with naked contempt. Claire didn't look away, didn't flinch. She just stared back with the same cold determination she'd shown when she chose death over submission. Judge Barnes entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. The judge was exactly as Elias had imagined, stern-faced, gray-haired, with eyes that missed nothing. We are here, Barnes announced, to determine the guilt or innocence of Gideon Blackwell on 7 counts of serious crime. This court will be run with decorum and respect. Anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed. Are we clear? Everyone nodded. Then let us proceed. Prosecutor Fitch, call your first witness. Thomas Fitch, the federal prosecutor, was a wiry man with fierce eyes and a reputation for never losing. He stood and buttoned his jacket with theatrical precision. The territory calls Miss Claire Donovan Mercer. Claire stood, smoothed her dress, and walked to the witness stand. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, her voice steady and clear. Fitch approached with a gentle expression. Mrs. Mercer, Please tell the court what happened on the 10th of July, 1983. Claire took a breath and began. She told them about the school where she taught, about Blackwell's persistent courtship, about his public proposal and her public refusal. She told them about being kidnapped, about Blackwell tying her to a wooden cross in the desert, about 2 days without water or shade. The courtroom was utterly silent. Even the newspapermen had stopped scribbling, caught up in the horror of her story. "And then what happened?" Fitch prompted. "Then Elias Mercer found me, cut me down, saved my life." "What did you do after Mr. Mercer rescued you?" This was the dangerous part. Claire glanced at Elias, drew strength from his presence, and spoke clearly. "I made him an offer. I told him that if he would protect me from Mr. Blackwell, I would give myself to him 3 times a day. Morning, noon, and night." The courtroom erupted. People gasped, whispered, pointed. Judge Barnes had to bang his gavel 3 times to restore order. "Why did you make such an offer?" Fitch asked. "Because I had nothing else to trade," Claire said simply. "No money, no property, no family who could protect me. All I had was my body, and I chose to offer it to a good man rather than let a monster take it by force. That was my choice. My decision, my right." "Did Mr. Mercer force you?" "No. He told me I didn't owe him anything, that he would protect me regardless. But I wanted to keep my promise. Not because I had to, but because I chose to." Blackwell's lead lawyer, a slick man named Pendleton, stood for cross-examination. He smiled at Claire like a wolf eyeing a sheep. "Mrs. Mercer, isn't it true that you're a woman of questionable morals? That you offered yourself sexually to a man you barely knew?" "I offered myself to a man who saved my life," Claire corrected. "And there's nothing questionable about choosing survival. But you admit you engaged in relations with Mr. Mercer?" "I admit I made love to my husband." "Yes. He wasn't your husband then. He is now. And the church married us with full knowledge of our circumstances." Pendleton changed tactics. "Mrs. Mercer, my client says you fabricated this entire story, that you and Mr. Mercer conspired to extort money from him. Your client is a liar." "Objection," Pendleton shouted. "Sustained," Judge Barnes said. "Mrs. Mercer, please stick to answering the questions asked." "I'm sorry, Your Honor, but I will not sit here and let that man's lawyer rewrite history. Gideon Blackwell tied me to a cross and left me to die. That's not fabrication, that's truth." Pendleton tried for another hour to break her, to find contradictions in her story, to make her seem like a scheming temptress. But Claire held firm, answering every question with calm precision. Finally, frustrated, Pendleton said, "No further questions." Claire stepped down from the witness stand. As she passed Blackwell's table, he leaned forward and whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "Whore." Claire stopped, turned, and looked down at him. "I'd rather be a whore who chose her own fate than a slave to your ego." The courtroom gasped. Judge Barnes banged his gavel. "Mrs. Mercer, that's enough." But Claire had made her point. She walked back to her seat beside Elias with her head high. And when she sat down, Elias took her hand and squeezed it tight. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. Next came Elias's testimony. He corroborated Claire's story, added details about the attacks on his ranch, the poisoned cattle, the burned house. He showed the court his property assessments, evidence of the financial damage Blackwell had caused. Pendleton tried the same tactics on Elias, but they bounced off like arrows off armor. Elias had been questioned by hostile forces with far worse than words at their disposal. A lawyer in a nice suit held no fear for him. "Mr. Mercer, isn't it true you took advantage of a vulnerable woman?" "No, sir. I protected a woman who'd been victimized by your client. You had sexual relations with her before marriage. I made love to a woman who chose me freely." Elias met Pendleton's eyes without blinking. "Just like you probably do with your wife. The only difference is we were honest about it." The courtroom laughed. Even Judge Barnes cracked a smile. Pendleton tried a different angle. "Mr. Mercer, you're 23 years older than Mrs. Mercer. Don't you think that's inappropriate?" "I think what's inappropriate is a man leaving a woman to die in the desert because she refused his proposal." Elias's voice hardened. "I think what's inappropriate is poisoning a man's cattle to force his daughter into marriage." I think what's inappropriate is everything your client has done for the past decade. Objection, Pendleton said, but his voice lacked conviction. Overruled, Judge Barnes replied. The witness may continue. Your client is a predator, Elias said, looking directly at Blackwell. He finds vulnerable people and breaks them. He uses money and violence to get what he wants. And when someone finally stands up to him, he tries to destroy them. That's who Gideon Blackwell is. No further questions, Pendleton muttered, returning to his seat. William Donovan testified next, bringing the loan documents that proved Blackwell's fraud. A handwriting expert confirmed that the interest rate had been altered after signing. A chemist testified that 2 different types of ink had been used, applied at different times. The evidence was damning. The jury leaned forward, paying close attention as William explained how Blackwell had systematically destroyed his livelihood, then offered marriage to his daughter as the only way out. I should have protected her, William said, voice breaking. I should have gone to the law, should have fought back. Instead, I let fear control me. And my daughter almost died because of it. Mr. Donovan, Fitch said gently. Did Gideon Blackwell ever threaten you directly? Yes, many times. William straightened in his chair. He told me that if Claire didn't marry him, he'd make sure I lost everything. He said accidents happen to people who don't cooperate. He said my ranch could burn down in the night, or I could fall off a cliff and no one would question it. Did you believe these threats? I believed them absolutely, because I knew what he'd done to others. Then came the survivors, Thomas Reed and Margaret Flynn, 2 people Blackwell had left in the desert years before. Both were scarred by the experience, emotionally and physically, but both spoke clearly about Blackwell's cruelty, his belief that he could do whatever he wanted to whomever he wanted. Thomas Reed, a former ranch hand who'd witnessed Blackwell shoot Robert Hayes in the back, described the murder in chilling detail. He'd fled Arizona immediately after, lived in New Mexico for 3 years, in fear that Blackwell would find him. Margaret Flynn told a story similar to Claire's. Blackwell had proposed marriage, she'd refused, and he'd had his men tie her to a post in the desert for a day and a half. She'd survived only because a passing prospector found her. Why didn't you come forward before? Fitch asked. Because I was terrified. Margaret's voice shook. Everyone knew what happened to people who crossed Gideon Blackwell. They disappeared, or they had accidents, or their businesses burned down. The law wouldn't touch him. So I stayed silent. What changed? You. Margaret looked at Claire. When I heard what you did, how you survived and fought back, I knew I had to speak up. You gave me courage. Marshal Wade testified about the final battle, about Blackwell giving the order to burn Elias's house, about the men killed in the assault. The 2 captured deputies who'd turned state's evidence testified that Blackwell had ordered them to kill Elias and Claire if they didn't surrender. The evidence piled up like stones on a grave. By the end of the second week, it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that Blackwell was guilty. But Blackwell's lawyers weren't done. They called character witnesses who swore Blackwell was a pillar of the community. They brought financial records showing his charitable donations. They painted him as a successful businessman targeted by a scheming woman and a jealous rival. It was all smoke and mirrors. But smoke and mirrors could sometimes confuse a jury. On the 3rd week of trial, Prosecutor Fitch called his final witness, a surprise that even Wade hadn't mentioned. The territory calls Maria Delgado. An elderly woman walked to the stand, moving slowly with the aid of a cane. She looked terrified but determined. Mrs. Delgado, please tell the court about your daughter. The old woman's voice shook but held. My daughter? She worked for Mr. Blackwell as maid. She's 17. Beautiful girl. Smart. What happened to her? Mr. Blackwell, Maria paused, gathered herself. He forced himself on her. Many times. She tried to tell Sheriff. Sheriff, do nothing. Say Mr. Blackwell is important man. Who believed poor Mexican girl? What happened to your daughter? Fitch asked gently. She killed herself. Cannot live with shame. She only 17. The courtroom went dead silent. Even Pendleton looked shaken. When did this happen? 5 years ago. 1978? Maria looked directly at Blackwell now, eyes blazing with decades of suppressed rage. Why I not come forward before? I afraid. Mr. Blackwell, he have power. I just old woman. Who listen to me, she continued, voice growing stronger. But when I hear what he do to another girl, I think, enough? No more. He need to pay. Blackwell's face had gone white. Pendleton jumped up. Objection. This is completely irrelevant, not part of the charges. It goes to pattern of behavior, Fitch countered. Shows a history of victimizing vulnerable women. Judge Barnes thought for a long moment. I'll allow it. The jury may consider this testimony when evaluating Mr. Blackwell's character. The defense tried to recover. They brought rebuttal witnesses who claimed Maria's daughter had been mentally unstable. They suggested Maria was lying for attention or money. But the damage was done. The jury had seen the pattern. Young women, vulnerable women, women Blackwell thought he could control. Claire wasn't his first victim. She was just the first to survive and fight back. Closing arguments took 2 days. Pendleton painted Blackwell as a victim of circumstance, a successful man brought down by those who envied him. He suggested that Claire and Elias had conspired to extort money, that the violence at the ranch was self-defense, that the whole thing was a calculated scheme. Fitch painted Blackwell as a predator who thought his money put him above the law. He walked the jury through the timeline of crimes: the poisoned cattle, the fraudulent loan, the kidnapping, the attempted murder, the assault on the ranch. He quoted Claire's testimony, Elias's testimony, the witnesses who'd suffered under Blackwell's tyranny for years. And then he said something that would echo through the courtroom and beyond. People are not property. This is the fundamental truth that Gideon Blackwell never learned. He believed that money gave him the right to own others, to control them, to destroy them if they refused to submit. But this is America, and in America, people belong to themselves. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. We find the defendant, Gideon Blackwell, guilty on all 7 counts. The courtroom exploded. People cheered. Blackwell's lawyers shouted objections. Claire burst into tears. Elias held her while she cried, his own eyes wet. Judge Barnes banged his gavel until order was restored. Then he looked at Blackwell with cold contempt. Gideon Blackwell, you have been found guilty of murder, attempted murder, fraud, arson, assault, and conspiracy. This court has heard testimony about your character, your crimes, and your complete lack of remorse. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to life imprisonment at Yuma Territorial Prison without possibility of parole. Blackwell finally broke. This is injustice. I'm a businessman. She was supposed to be mine. I paid for her. People are not property, Mr. Blackwell, Barnes said, and there was steel in his voice. You never learned that lesson in life. You'll learn it now. He banged his gavel one final time. This court is adjourned. As deputies led Blackwell away in chains, he looked back at Claire one last time. Not with rage now, but with something like incomprehension, as if even facing life imprisonment, he couldn't understand how a woman had defeated him. Claire held Elias's hand and watched him go. She felt no triumph, no joy, just a deep, bone-tired relief that it was finally over. Outside the courthouse, William embraced his daughter. I'm proud of you, Claire, so proud. We did it together, Papa. No, William said firmly. You did it. You were the brave one. I was just following your lead. Marshal Wade shook hands with Elias and Claire. You two are going to be famous. The newspapers are already writing stories, the woman who defied the desert baron, that sort of thing. I don't want fame, Claire said. I just want to go home. Then go home, Wade said with a smile. You've earned it. They left Tucson the next morning, riding into the sunrise. 3 days back to the ranch, to the land that was theirs, to the future they'd fought for. But they weren't going back to ruins. While they'd been in Tucson, something unexpected had happened. The people of Wilcox, ashamed that they'd let Blackwell terrorize their neighbors for so long, had organized a barn raising. When Elias and Claire rode up to their property, they found 30 men working on a new house. Not as big as the old one, but solid and well built. The frame was already up, the roof halfway done. A man named Peterson, who ran the general store, approached with a wide grin. Figured you folks earned yourselves a new start. We're paying our debts. Elias was speechless. Claire cried again, but these were good tears. They pitched in to help, and by the end of October, the house was finished. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a parlor with a fireplace. Nothing fancy, but it was home. William stayed on, helping to rebuild the herd with cattle he purchased using money he'd saved over the years. The 3 of them worked the ranch together, a family forged by fire. In December, Claire discovered she was pregnant. Elias wept when she told him. After 10 years alone, he'd given up on ever being a father. Now, at 48 years old, he was getting a second chance at everything. We're going to name her Ruth if it's a girl, Claire decided. After Ruth from the Bible, the woman who chose her own family. And if it's a boy, Elias, of course, after the man who saved my life. Their daughter Ruth was born in August of 1984, delivered by the same midwife who'd attended half the births in Wilcox. She came into the world screaming, red-faced, and furious. And Elias fell in love instantly. He held her in his massive, scarred hands and marveled at how small she was, how perfect, how miraculous. She has your eyes, Claire said from the bed, exhausted but happy. And your fighting spirit, Elias replied. Listen to those lungs. William stood in the doorway, smiling. I'm a grandfather. Never thought I'd live to see it. The first year with Ruth was chaos. Sleepless nights, constant worry, the terror that something might happen to this tiny person they'd brought into the world. But it was also joy beyond anything Elias had imagined. Every smile, every small achievement felt like a miracle. Claire proved to be a natural mother, patient, loving, but also practical. She taught Ruth to be strong from day one, to face the world without fear. She's going to grow up knowing she can choose her own path. Claire told Elias one night as they watched Ruth sleep. No one will ever own her. No one will ever make her feel powerless. Damn right, Elias agreed. But as the years passed, Elias couldn't shake the question that had haunted him since Wade first mentioned Blackwell's long history. One night, after Claire and Ruth were asleep, he rode into Wilcox and found Wade at the hotel. I need to know something, Elias said. About my first wife, Anna. Wade looked up from his papers, reading something in Elias's face. You think Blackwell had something to do with her death? It was a statement, not a question. I testified against a man named Carson 10 years ago, Elias said. Land dispute. Carson worked for Blackwell. 3 weeks later, Anna was dead. The doctor said influenza, but it was so fast. One day she was fine, the next she was dying. Wade pulled out a file. I've been looking into that. Carson disappeared right after your wife died. Just vanished. Never collected his final pay from Blackwell. I've got a theory, but no proof. Tell me. Wade hesitated, then spoke carefully. There's a poison, arsenic derivative, that mimics influenza symptoms. Fast-acting, hard to detect. Blackwell's used it before on livestock. I think he might have used it on people too. Elias felt his blood run cold. You're saying Anna was murdered? I'm saying it's possible, probable, even. But 10 years later, with no body and no evidence, I can't prove it. Wade met Elias's eyes. I'm sorry. Elias sat there for a long moment, processing. If it was true, if Anna had been murdered because of his testimony, then he'd been living with Blackwell's shadow over his life for a decade without knowing it. Does it change anything? Wade asked gently. Blackwell's in prison for life. Justice has been served. It changes everything, Elias said quietly. And nothing at all. He rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, carrying the weight of this new knowledge. When he climbed into bed beside Claire, she stirred. Where did you go? To see Wade. To ask about Anna. Claire was fully awake now. What did he say? Elias told her. When he finished, Claire was quiet for a long time. I'm sorry, she finally said. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, and it doesn't change what we have. Elias pulled her close. But it makes me understand something. Why fighting Blackwell mattered so much. It wasn't just about saving you. It was about finally stopping him, finally making him pay for all the lives he destroyed. Claire kissed him. We stopped him together. The years rolled on. The ranch prospered. Word of their story spread, and people came from all over to see the place where a woman had defied a tyrant. Some came out of curiosity, others looking for hope, for proof that the powerful could be defeated. Elias and Claire welcomed them all. They told their story honestly, leaving nothing out. The good, the bad, the complicated parts that didn't fit into neat moral categories. In 1990, when Ruth was 6, she asked her father about the famous promise, the 3 times a day thing that everyone whispered about. Elias and Ruth were mending fence together when she asked, "Papa, is it true what they say? That Mama offered herself to you?" Elias set down his tools and looked at his daughter. She had Claire's green eyes and fierce spirit, had grown into a young girl who feared nothing. "It's true," he said. "Your mother was dying in the desert. I saved her. She offered me the only thing she had left, her body, 3 times a day, in exchange for protection. Did you take advantage of her?" I asked her that same question every day for 2 weeks, and every time she told me the same thing. It was her choice, her decision, her way of taking control when a man had tried to steal all her choices. Elias looked at Ruth seriously. "Your mother is the strongest person I've ever known. She made a deal to survive, then turned it into love. That's not weakness, Ruth. That's power." Ruth nodded slowly. "I want to be like her. You already are." William Donovan lived to see his granddaughter Ruth turn 14. In 1998, at age 66, he died quietly in his sleep in the small room they'd built for him off the kitchen. They found him in the morning, peaceful, a photograph of Claire's mother clutched in his hand. They buried him in Wilcox Cemetery beside his late wife, not under the oak tree. That place was reserved for the 3 who'd fought together, who'd changed each other's lives forever. But Elias carved William's headstone with the same care he'd given Raphael's. William Donovan, father, grandfather, a man who found his courage. Ruth cried at the funeral. Claire held her and whispered, "Your grandfather wasn't perfect, but he learned, and that's all any of us can do." The years continued their march. The ranch became a legend, a symbol of resistance and redemption. Ruth grew into a strong young woman, then married a good man named Thomas, who reminded Elias of himself at that age. They had 3 children, and Claire spoiled them all shamelessly. Claire lived to see her grandchildren grow. She died in 2020, age 62, of pneumonia. It happened fast, just like Anna. One day she was fine, the next she was struggling to breathe, and 3 days later she was gone. Elias held her hand as she died. She was still beautiful to him, gray hair and wrinkles and all, still the fierce woman he'd found tied to a cross 37 years ago. No regrets. She whispered with her last strength. "None." Elias agreed. "Not a single one. Tell our story, Elias. Tell the children. Tell them that love is a choice, not an accident. And choosing is the bravest thing anyone can do. I promise." Claire closed her eyes and was gone. Elias buried her next to Raphael under the oak tree. The tree was massive now, its shade deep and cool. All the people Elias loved, together in death as they'd been in life. He lived 3 more years, long enough to see his great-grandson Benjamin born, long enough to tell his story one more time, to pass on the lessons he'd learned. On a hot afternoon in July 2023, 40 years, almost to the day since he'd found Claire in the desert, Elias sat on his porch with young Benjamin and told him everything. About the cross, about the promise, about Raphael and Blackwell and the battle that had nearly killed them all. About love found in the worst circumstances and turned into something beautiful. "Why are you telling me this?" Benjamin asked when the story was done. "Because you were going to leave. Run off to Silicon Valley looking for easy money and fast success. But I want you to understand something before you go." Elias looked at the land, the house, the graves under the oak tree. "This place isn't valuable because of the dirt or the buildings. It's valuable because of what happened here. Because people fought and died and loved here. Because your great-grandmother chose freedom over slavery. And that choice echoed down through generations, touched lives you'll never know about." He paused, letting the words settle. So you want me to stay? I want you to understand what you're walking away from. This isn't just land. It's legacy. It's story. It's proof that ordinary people can stand up to monsters and win. If you leave, you're not just leaving a ranch. You're leaving a piece of history. Benjamin was quiet for a long time, staring at the three graves under that massive oak tree. Then he spoke, his voice different now, less certain, more thoughtful. Tell me about the tree, Grandpa. Oak trees don't grow in the desert like this. How is it even alive? Elias smiled, a secret playing at the corners of his mouth. That's the part of the story I haven't told anyone yet. Not even your grandmother knew, not completely. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. When I buried Anna 48 years ago, I planted an acorn beside her grave. Everyone told me it would never take, wrong climate, wrong soil, not enough water, but I watered it every day anyway. It was the only thing I could still do for her, you see, the only way to keep her memory alive. Benjamin leaned forward, and it grew. It grew, against all odds, against nature itself. Elias's voice grew softer. When I buried Raphael, I planted another acorn. When I buried Claire, I planted a third. Each time I thought, this tree shouldn't exist, but it does. Just like our love shouldn't have worked. A dying woman and a lonely man. A deal that should have been shameful but became sacred. But it did work. He met Benjamin's eyes. That tree is impossible, but it's real. That's what faith looks like, boy. That's what hope looks like. You plant something that shouldn't survive, and you water it anyway. And sometimes, it grows into something that provides shade for generations. Benjamin stared at the oak tree with new understanding. 3 acorns. 3 people who changed your life. 3 people who taught me that choosing is what makes us human. Elias's voice carried the weight of 9 decades. Anna chose me when she could have had easier men. Raphael chose redemption when running would have been simpler. Claire chose to survive when death would have been quicker. He paused. And I chose to fight when surrendering would have been safer. That's what I want you to understand, Benjamin. Life is going to offer you 1,000 chances to take the easy path, to choose comfort over courage. But the easy path doesn't grow oak trees in the desert. What happened to Blackwell? Benjamin asked suddenly. You said he went to prison for life, but you never said what happened after. Elias's expression darkened. That's the part I've been waiting to tell you. The part that closes the circle. He pulled an envelope from his shirt pocket, yellowed with age, postmarked from Yuma, dated 2015. This came 5 years after Claire died. I never showed it to anyone. Benjamin opened the envelope carefully and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. Mercer, you win. 32 years in this hell and I finally understand what the judge meant. People aren't property. I thought I owned the world, but I owned nothing, not even myself. The woman you saved, she was free from the moment she chose you. I've been a prisoner my whole life, even before these walls. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her she was right. G. Blackwell Benjamin looked up, shocked. He apologized? He died 3 days after writing that, Elias said quietly. Heart attack in his cell. He was 68 years old, spent more than half his life in prison. The guard said he'd changed in his last years, helped other inmates, taught some of them to read, talked about all the people he'd hurt. Do you think he really changed? Elias considered the question carefully. I think suffering has a way of teaching lessons that nothing else can. But change doesn't erase what was done. It just means he finally understood the weight of it. He took the letter back, folded it carefully. I never showed this to Claire because I didn't want her last years touched by his shadow. But I kept it because it proved something important. Even monsters can wake up. Even the worst of us can have a moment where we see the truth. Benjamin was silent, processing. Then he stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out over the land his great-grandfather had defended. I'm not going to Silicon Valley, he said, finally. Elias's heart lifted, but he kept his voice neutral. Oh? I'm going to stay. Not because you told me to, but because I choose to. Benjamin turned back to face him. You're right. This land is more than dirt. It's proof that people can change their own fate. And I want to be part of that story, not run away from it. Elias smiled, and for the first time in months, the pain in his chest eased. Good. That's good. But Grandpa, I want to do more than just keep the ranch going. I want to turn it into something that honors the story. Benjamin's eyes were bright with sudden purpose. A foundation maybe for people escaping abuse. A place where people can come and learn that they have choices, that they can rebuild. Elias felt tears on his weathered cheeks. Your grandmother would have loved that. They sat together as the sun set. 2 generations bound by a story that had started with 7 words in the desert. Save me, 3 times a day. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. His chest hurt. Had been hurting for weeks now, but he'd told no one. He knew what it meant. His heart, which had survived wars and battles and the deaths of everyone he'd loved, was finally giving out. He walked outside under a sky full of stars, made his way to the oak tree. His legs were unsteady, but he managed. He stood before the 3 graves and spoke to them as if they could hear. Anna, I hope you forgive me for loving again. But you told me to, remember? You made me promise. He moved to the 2nd grave. Rafael, hermano, you died a good man. You made it right in the end. That matters more than you knew. Finally, he knelt before Claire's grave. His knees protesting. Claire, my love, my fierce warrior. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for teaching me that love is an action, not an accident. I'll be with you soon. He stayed there for a long time, remembering. The way she'd looked tied to that cross, more alive in her refusal to surrender than most people were in their comfortable lives. The way she'd stood in that courtroom and claimed her own story. The way she'd held baby Ruth and promised their daughter would never be owned by anyone. As he sat there, Benjamin appeared beside him, having followed quietly. Grandpa, you should come inside. It's cold. In a minute, Elias said. I'm just saying goodbye. Goodbye to who? To all of them. To this place. Elias looked up at Benjamin. I'm dying, boy. Heart's given out. Known it for a while now. Benjamin's face went white. We need to get you to a hospital. No, Elias said firmly. I'm 90 years old. I've lived longer than I had any right to. I've seen my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I've loved 2 good women and been loved back. I fought for something that mattered and won. He struggled to his feet with Benjamin's help. I don't want machines and hospitals. I want to die here where I lived. That's my choice. They walked back to the house together, Benjamin supporting his great-grandfather's weight. Elias made it to his bed, the same bed where Claire had lain when he first brought her home from the desert, where they'd made love as husband and wife, where Ruth had been conceived. Benjamin sat beside him. What do I do now? You keep the promise, Elias said, his voice growing weaker. You tell the story. You make sure people remember that choosing is what makes us free. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was 48 again, riding through the desert, hearing that first scream. For a moment Claire was alive beside him, young and fierce and unbroken. For a moment Raphael was laughing, Anna was reading by the fire, and the future stretched out golden and full of promise. Elias. Claire's voice, soft in his ear. I've been waiting. His eyes opened one last time. Benjamin was crying, but Elias smiled. Tell them, he whispered. Tell them people aren't property. Tell them choosing is everything. And then Elias Mercer, who had saved a woman in the desert and been saved in return, let go. They buried him between Claire and Raphael, under the oak tree that shouldn't exist but did. The funeral drew hundreds, people whose lives had been touched by the story, people who'd heard the tale and found courage in it, people who needed to believe that ordinary folks could stand against tyrants and win. Benjamin gave the eulogy. He spoke about his great-grandfather's life, about the battles fought and the love found. But mostly he spoke about choice. My great-grandfather taught me that we're all given moments where we have to decide who we're going to be, he said. We can choose safety, or we can choose courage. We can choose to accept what's given, or we can choose to fight for what's right. The easy path or the oak tree path. He looked at the graves. 3 people rest here under this impossible tree. A woman who chose freedom over submission. A man who chose redemption over running. A woman who chose to turn survival into love. And a man who chose to fight when fighting made no sense. Benjamin's voice grew stronger. Their choices echoed. I'm standing here because they chose courage, because they chose each other, because they chose to believe that people can change their own fate. He paused. My great-grandfather's last words were, tell them people aren't property, tell them choosing is everything. So I'm telling you, I'm telling the world, you are not defined by what's been done to you. You are defined by what you choose to do next. The crowd was silent. Then someone in the back started clapping. Soon everyone joined in, not because it was a funeral, but because it was a celebration. A celebration of a life fully lived, of choices made with courage, of love that conquered everything thrown against it. After the funeral, after everyone had left, Benjamin stood alone before the 4 graves. He held 4 acorns in his hand, gifts from the oak tree. One for each of you, he said, and one for me. He planted them in a circle around the original tree. Everyone said they wouldn't grow. Wrong climate, wrong soil. But Benjamin watered them anyway, because that's what faith looked like. That's what hope looked like. And 3 months later, when the first small shoots broke through the earth, Benjamin understood what his great-grandfather had been trying to tell him all along. Some things grow not because conditions are perfect, but because someone chose to nurture them anyway. Some things survive not because survival is easy, but because giving up is worse. The Mercer Ranch became the Mercer Foundation in 2024. Benjamin turned it into a sanctuary for people escaping abuse, a place where they could learn skills, rebuild their lives, and most importantly, remember that they had choices. Above the entrance, he hung a wooden plaque with words carved deep. 3 times a day was the promise, but love was the choice. And choice is what makes us free. Below it, in smaller letters, in memory of Claire Donovan Mercer, who chose life, Elias Mercer, who chose to fight, Rafael Ortega, who chose redemption, and Anna Mercer, who chose hope. The foundation thrived. Hundreds of people passed through, each carrying away the same lesson. You are not what was done to you. You are what you choose to do next. And on quiet evenings when the desert wind blew through the oak trees, now 5 of them, impossible but real, visitors swore they could hear voices. A woman laughing. A man singing in Spanish. The sound of 2 people talking quietly, planning their future, choosing each other again and again. The story became legend. Books were written, films were made. But the real legacy lived in the people who heard it and found courage to make their own choices. The women who left abusive relationships. The men who stood up to power. The children who learned that their lives belonged to them and them alone. And every year on July 15th, the anniversary of the day Elias found Claire in the desert, the foundation held a ceremony under the oak trees. People came from all over to stand in that sacred space and make declarations. I choose to leave. I choose to stay. I choose to fight. I choose to love. I choose me. Benjamin Mercer, standing where his great-grandfather once stood, watched them make their choices and remembered. The easy path doesn't grow oak trees in the desert, but the hard path, the path of choosing courage over comfort, love over fear, action over surrender, that path could grow forests. And in those forests, generations would find shade. The story that began with 7 words, "Save me 3 times a day," had become something larger than any one person. It had become a truth that couldn't be silenced. People are not property, and choosing is what makes us free. That truth, planted in the desert in 1983, watered with blood and tears and hope, had grown into something that would outlast them all. An oak tree where none should grow. A legacy where none should survive. A love that conquered death itself. And it all started because one woman chose to survive and one man chose to fight. And together they proved that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to give up. Under the Arizona sun, the oak trees stood tall. Impossible. Real. Eternal. Just like the choice to be free.